Hey everyone, Colin Gray from Vicious Kitten Records here with you today, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of an insight or background into the process of how this, recording process rather, of how this album came to fruition. I got an email from someone who recently picked up this album. They were kind of curious how you start with a cassette recording and it ends up in a really, really cool live recording and then an official CD release, right? So it got me sort of thinking how, you know, back in those days in the 1980s, and you would, well, not everyone did, but, you know, I would go and see bands, probably from a period to say 87 and fervently till around 93, 94, I would be recording bands with my cassette recorder. And I still did the odd one. I take it every now and then up until around, I think the last one I did was around 2002. But by then technology in terms of recording functionality and what was available had moved to digital recorders from tape recorders. So, you know, I kind of had lost a little bit of the interest anyway to do that. So, but certainly for that period from 87 onwards, for about a 5-year period, across hundreds of gigs, I would have my cassette recorder in my pocket. Didn't record every gig, obviously, but there's a lot that I did. And obviously being a fan of, you know, the HITMEN and the Screaming Tribesmen and, you know, Lime Spiders, Hard On, Psychotic Turnbuckles, many other, TEK, Rose Tattoo, too many other bands that I've cared to sort of name, I would invariably have my recorder in my pocket. And, you know, not only did you, you know, see the gig like everyone else, but you would walk out with a unique or one-off recording of that performance in your pocket. Sometimes I'd be so keen I'd stick it straight in the cassette player of the car and listen to it. I couldn't really hear it, but, you know, because, you know, the ears were ringing or whatever, but you had that one-off unique recording. You know, similarly, I wasn't the only one who sort of did that. I had some friends who would also record other bands around, even in different countries, and it was a bit of a tape traders sort of network at that time. Fast forward to now, everyone's got a recording device on their phone, right? Everyone. But it's kind of lost that, I guess, charm, for want of a better term, of you know, what it was sort of back then. But anyway, so yeah, so certainly during that period, I would have my cassette recorder with me. It was not a fancy one, actually. It was a realistic brand, which I think was the Tandy Electronics brand. It was a realistic brand cassette recorder. It had a red light on it. I remember that, and I had to cover the red light with black tape so you couldn't see it, because back then recording was sort of a no-no. You know, people didn't take photos. It was uncommon, certainly uncommon for people to video record a band, and it was quite often a challenge to get a cassette recorder into a gig. I remember getting kicked out of the Sydney Entertainment Centre a couple of times, actually, for having, you know, a recorder. But anyway, so certainly from 87 onwards, and certainly, as I was saying, a lot of those sort of bands, so the HITMEN, Screaming Tribesmen, these are some of the cassettes that I've still, you know, have retained. Most of them I had given back to the artist in recent years. I had a lot of Pete Wells, a lot of bands like Alan Lancaster's stuff, John Brewster, Lime Spiders, as I said. It didn't matter who it was. Stevie Wright, I recorded him a couple of times. Bigger bands as well, actually, in the Entertainment Centre, I remember. Bands like Foreigner, I recorded. So again, it didn't matter who it was. I would often have my cassette recorder with me. A Guns N' Roses show, actually, that first one they did in Sydney in December 88. I got a great quality recording of that. Standing near the mixing desk was your kind of aim, because then you're trying to get, obviously, the best sound you could get. And that's, you know, if you read the liner notes to this HITMEN CD, it's very much lightning in a bottle, because it was capturing the sound, the best sound you could get was always the key. So you're trying to get the right balance between all the instruments and the vocals. And you didn't want to be standing too close to the speakers. You didn't want too much bass coming through. It's trying to strike that balance. So basically, that's how that sort of came to fruition with that cassette recorder. And then this just became another one of those cassettes that was recorded. It ended up in a box, like a lot of these other things. So this is like one of the first Candy Harlot shows. This is another HITMEN show that I've recorded, particularly when they reformed again. So this was at Gladesville Hotel in August 1990. Annandale Hotel, 16th of November 1991. So this was on that same 3 or 4 or 5 shows with DENIZ TEK. Sorry, 4 shows. So the first night, obviously, which is this recording, was the Toucan Tango at Newtown. A couple of nights later was at Moby's at Whale Beach. I went to that, but I did not have my recorder. And then, of course, 2 nights at the Annandale. I have both of those Annandale shows on cassette. But again, the sound of those recordings on cassette was nowhere near as good, still good, but nowhere near as great as what has been released on this live CD. And obviously, if you've got a studio whiz like Ernio in Melbourne who can apply his magic, he can bring out the sound completely, which is what he did. He applied his magic to this, which is why it sounds so cool in actual fact. So there's some other things. Screaming Tribesman, I saw a bunch of those sort of shows. Girl Monster, okay. Anyway, so that was just a bit of a backdrop to how that sort of process occurred. And then you've ended up with, thankfully on this, some really cool newspaper articles, adverts, gig adverts, some cool liner notes just from remembering back at that period and how exciting it was when DENIZ TEK had first come back to Australia. Because you've got to remember, he, like a lot of those thing with Radio Birdman, is because they hadn't reformed. So that mythology around Radio Birdman was still very much prevalent. So seeing him for the first time, particularly at Newtown, was just, amazing. It was just one of those, great moments. So this all sort of came together because it was a little bit of history. First time he'd been in Australia, or had played on an Australian stage since those shows with New Race in 1981. HITMEN were really on fire just on the release of that Moronic Inferno album. The band is sort of white hot. They're really firing on all cylinders. They're pumped up for this gig, and I was at the right place at the right time in terms of where I was standing with a cassette recorder, and bang, record, press play. A few years later, I'm thinking, wow, this came out really, really cool. And this is why you've ended up with this really great overall package. There are still some of these available. It's not available digitally. It's only available via physical CD. You can still get it everywhere now through MVD distribution. If you Google it, you'll find it. HITMEN DTK with special guest DENIZ TEK. Tonight We Ride. Live in Sydney, 13th of November 1991. Once it sells out, that's it. It won't probably be repressed. So if you haven't got it, be sure to pick up a copy while you can. Sales are still, I'm still selling a few of these every week, even through the Bandcamp page. So please, if you haven't got one, check it out. Please also remember that there's a whole range of shirts available in different ranges, Vicious Kitten type of shirts, Kevin K shirts. There's a whole raft of those available through T Republic. If you search for Vicious Kitten in that website, you'll be able to find it. A lot of cool things happening in the Vicious Kitten world. A couple of really cool releases coming very soon. Also remember that Girl Monster have their brand new album forthcoming on Vicious Kitten soon. They currently have a single out digitally, which you can check out. And yeah, so please, if you haven't already, subscribe to Vicious Kitten Records. Check out the Bandcamp page. Check us out on Facebook. And yep, more cool stuff happening. So thanks for your time today. Haven't got this, please check it out. It's a really cool album. Thanks for watching. My name's Cowboy Cole. We'll catch up with you next time. Cheers.